Well, thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate having you. A lot of you are here today to talk about zero trust and basically why is it more important than ever, and what do we do here at Better Cloud, basically to help you with some of this problem. So just to give you a little bit of background on myself, my name is Devin Domingo. I'm a 13-year vet in the tech industry. I actually originally started my job selling iPads at an Apple store, and yet somehow I am here today as a solutions engineer. I'm really obsessed with the problem of just how do we protect ourselves from data oversharing, and love to walk you through our platform and what that looks like. I'm also really focused specifically data oversharing, specifically as it relates to collaboration tools, thinking like Google Drive and Dropbox and Box and Slack. So I think a lot of people in this audience use some of those tools today. So this should feel and sound somewhat familiar, even if you don't do anything in security. Also previously, I used to work on our product team as well as our implementation team, just partnering with hundreds of customers, learning a lot of these stories in the field and really helping them through this problem. So trust me, I got your back as we were talking through this particular problem. And I just want to set today's agenda, just a little bit of some guidelines. What's going to happen today, if you have any questions, please say hello in the chat. I will answer them at the end. We also have our esteemed moderators, Yum, and our product manager, Nicole, also here to help answer questions as we go along today. So please don't be shy, say hello. Love to talk throughout all of this. And of course, I'll answer questions at the end, and feel free to chat in anything that sounds interesting as we go through this. But basically, I'll go through a story, how we're seeing this even just manifest today in a very popular and very well-known tech company out there. You may have read some of this about that's going through a security problem. Then we'll look and see at the Better Cloud platform, how common is this problem? How often are we seeing it? Even within our own customers' data. And then after that, I'll give you a quick tour of how we do solve this problem around data oversharing within Better Cloud. How do we detect sensitive data? How do we help you with insider threats? How do we better set you up for better zero trust modeling and really make sure that data isn't leaking? I'm very happy to show you through all this. So with that, let's kick off with the story, right? So I've been doing a little bit of reading about a certain company by the name of Twitter, right? And right now, I think when I originally wrote this story, it was in a very different spot. But the latest and the greatest on it is we know that the Twitter deal seems to be back on. But before that, it definitely was not on. What was going on was obviously Elon Musk is trying to purchase Twitter. He looks at the company, he looks at, all the financial statements, everything that's going on within the org. He comes forward and he makes a statement that's like, there's too many bot accounts on this platform, right? Like I'm not getting the same ROI that I understand of this purchase, whatnot have you. In addition to this, we also have a security whistleblower come forward who mentions, you know what, like also on top of, Twitter practices and things that I would love to see better in this company. And now we have a mouthpiece of Elon pointing this all out to the public. Yeah, by the way, we still have users who still have access to data that they shouldn't have, right? Like Twitter internally could do a better job shoring up some of their user behaviors and some of their internal controls around basically what they have access to, right? And specifically in the realm of security, right? Like the stories that you hear a lot about really have to do with those external threats. And I read in the Verizon data breach report, they still make up about 80% of all security threats that a company will face. Everything from DDoS attacks, from people phishing your employees, to people trying to send them malware. We know this makes up the most common practices. But really what this whistleblower was pointing out was the other 20% of the puzzle, which is how do you stop people internally from the company causing accidental threats and accidental risks to your security, right? So Twitter makes the statement. They're like, listen, we don't even know what the security person is even talking about, right? Like, yes, we understand that there are things that need to be done with security, but this is like irrelevant and things like that. But still at this point, like, we as the public know this, and as everybody's IT security professionals know this, like we know that he was coming from a place of like good intention, right? He is really trying to tell the world that even the biggest companies in the world still struggle with this zero trust model and how users should be getting access to this data, right? For the first time in probably a while, we actually saw a lot of the revenue and the value implications of what happens if, in theory, like some place like Twitter were to have a data breach, you have this security professional coming forward and saying like, we need to shore up our controls, right? So if you think about it, a lot of this commentary and a lot of this discussion did lock up a $44 billion acquisition, right? And the share prices did fall about 7%. Very rarely do we see a direct impact on the market, somewhat like related basically to insider security threats, right? And, there's all these industry white papers that try to quantify this, tell you really what is that value of an insider threat and, what could happen if you are a data breach. And I'll go through some of those numbers after this. But really to see it at this scale, at this level of a platform that we know dear to our hearts, that like I love to type out to the internet all my thoughts and have them being shared, knowing that employees may accidentally do something with that data, or they may accidentally overshare it in ways that they're maybe not even entitled to do it, kind of brings me a little bit pause as a user of that platform. And I know a lot of us don't want to make good relationships with their customers, good relationships with the people who use our products, good relationships internally. And part of building a good security culture is establishing zero trust, always checking, always verifying that people should have access to the data that they need, but also doing this in a friendly and an easy kind of collaborative way. So I'll be walking through that in a little bit later, right? But I want to go through some industry benchmark data, right? Like how often is this problem happening around insider threats? How often is data oversharing happening? Yes, we have Twitter blowing up in our face about it. But really, like, what is also going on just industry wide, right? Basically, what we've learned is usually what causes a company to want to increase their security posture is usually a data breach. A lot of security professionals joke, but it's really true. It's not a matter of like if you're going to get breached, it's kind of a matter of when. And it's just a matter of detecting this, investing in the right tools, and knowing how to kind of like mitigate risk and establish, hey, when there is a data breach, we have the ability to recover from something like this, right? In a recent report by the Ponemon Institute in partnership with IBM, they always publish this report around the cost of a data breach, right? This year, they're quoting it costs a company on average about $4.4 million just to basically recover from the actual legal implications of a data breach. We're not talking about brand implication. We're not talking about projected revenue losses or consumer trust differences. We're just talking about the actual dollar or cents what you go to court over. And essentially, regardless of compliance standards, obviously this number could go up. If you're in healthcare, if you're in finance, you have very specific standards like HIPAA and GLBA, GBLA as an example. US also too faces a higher number. It's somewhere around 9.44 million for the average tech company. And again, I think it's just because of other data protection standards like the CCPA, also like GDPR, because we're doing a lot of international business. So anytime we're working with personally identifiable information, anytime we're working with any financial information, this is all stuff that puts your company at risk. And should the data breach, this is actually the pieces that will cost you the most. But those organizations that were able to show that they have mitigation and control factors, when they go to court, on average, they save up to $3.05 million just upfront because they're able to prove that they have the ability to contain and detect these breaches. And they're also able to do this on average within about 200 days or so. Now, another question that I had too is like, not every IT company has all their data in the cloud. Some people are still on-prem. They're using local service and local storage. But one thing that's really important to know is more and more companies are going cloud first. More and more companies like collaboration tools like Google Drive, like Dropbox, like OneDrive, because it really gives your employees a very easy way to collaborate and share, not only just within their own company, but working with third parties and other collaborators outside the company. However, with that becomes an increased risk of a cloud data breach. And that's why I'm showing you there's about 45% of breaches are occurring in the cloud environment. So there is obviously a trade-off here between employee collaboration and security. And we're in this position of where can we find the best of both, right? Now, what's interesting too is a Verizon 2022 report on data breaches showed that about 13% of all breaches come from a misconfigured cloud storage. And this is usually not purposeful. This isn't usually somebody who's like after financial goods. While that does make up a very, very, very small percentage of these cases, most of the time it was an accidental misconfiguration of a file or a folder or a repo or some sort of thing that protects some of your intellectual property, right? So when we talk about things like Google Drive and Box and Slack, think about things like public links or things that when you share things out with a gmail.com address or one of those third parties, you'll leave these shares open, you'll be collaborating with them for a certain period of time. But when those relationships terminate or when you don't need something public anymore because it's no longer relevant, do you actually go back and decide, I'm going to unshare this? Most of the time, no. And it's really one of those reasons why we would call this something like a misconfiguration, right? And the good news in general too, right, is these are all numbers really representing an average, right? We don't, in the event of a data breach still, like while you can save that 3.05 million just to say that you have proactive threat detection and remediation methods, specifically in this area, in general, companies that are adopting zero trust practices. So thinking about things like putting on single sign-on, right? And protecting access to user accounts. Showing that you have those kinds of controls in general will also save you about 1.2 million in the event of a data breach, even if it wasn't necessarily related to that specific area where the data breach had come from. So solving for those challenges, obviously with your user access, who's onboarding, who's offboarding, what accounts do they still have access to? What data will they access when they're working internally with my company? What controls are represented in their role? If you're doing these very common zero trust practices, you're still well on your way to being secure. It's really what we're looking at here with, not a non-user centric model, but rather a more asset centric model. What do I do about all these assets that I'm not even sure who's still accessing them anymore? And maybe they're people who aren't even internally in my company. So we'll be exploring that problem very in depth. What I did want to do is I did a quick exercise, just like what have we seen on the Better Cloud platform in general? How wide of this is a problem, this data oversharing when it comes to collaboration suites, right? What I've learned is the average Better Cloud customer leaves about 2% of their collaboration files and folders still public. There's legitimate use cases for leaving your stuff public, right? My great marketing team that's on this webinar, for example, they put things out into the public. Maybe there's press releases, maybe there's documents, maybe there's content that they're collaborating on that obviously they need to interface with the wider public. Our sales teams too, for example, may also need to put things out into the public to educate customers, whatever that looks like, right? It's really when that public sharing is not those teams, you may start to call into question, what is the business transparency and the urgency around why this public sharing is happening, right? Another metric that we look at too is what third parties some of those files and folders, whether they've been shared out with, right? We're able to see on our platform, for example, when you do an external share with certain email addresses, like when you go into Google Drive and you say, share this out with my Gmail address, right? Well, it turns out 4% of all files have been exposed with things like a very common email address. I'm talking things like gmail.com or AOL.com or Outlook.com. About 4% of an average company's files will fall into that bucket. So we know what happens. And again, like legitimate business use cases, right? I could be collaborating with a consultant, right? Like EY.com or somebody like that, and that will show up, right? But it's the personal email sharing where you start to question, why are people leaving my collaboration suite and wanting to share it with their own? What are they doing potentially with sensitive data, right? Now, I needed to pull back this onion another layer and try to figure out of all these files that have been exposed, are there any leading indicators that there could be sensitive data underneath, right? So I looked at certain keywords like payment, W-2, W-9, payroll. I looked at confidential, internal use only, a bunch of keywords that may be showing up in the title of a document that if I saw this ever exposed, I'd be like, why is that exposed, right? So what we found is about 0.2% of a company's assets meets some of this criteria. Now, maybe there are some business cases, maybe there are some third parties who help process some of this information, but in general, you should know this. You should have some of this visibility into what documents are being actively exposed and how you could reduce some of this insider threat, just in case an employee accidentally overexposes it, accidentally overshares it. It's just very important to have this as a leading indicator of potential threat. And this is without me content scanning anything. I haven't looked at any bodies of these documents. I don't actually know if there's sensitive data, but just based off keywords alone in the titles, this is a good enough leading indicator for me to suggest that every environment out there has something sensitive exposed. And that is what keeps me up at night. And that's why I think we're all here today. So for those of you who have not really seen Better Cloud before or know anything about what it does, we are the G2 Gartner recognized leading SaaS management platform. And in order to be a SaaS management platform, it takes 3 pillars of functionality. One is this growing problem around SaaS explosion, right? A lot of your teams are requesting the best tools in the market, like Slack and Miro and Microsoft Teams and whatever that may be. Some people get these on their own, and we have a module called SaaS App Discovery, specifically Discover, that helps detect some of that. Your IT team is also burdened with all the time-consuming process of onboarding and offboarding people into these different applications, and they would love to get that time back. So we have Better Cloud Manage to help automate a lot of that task for you. And really what we're focused on today is SaaS data security. So again, all those different assets that are being saved within these different SaaS applications. How do you know what's actually exposed? How do you get that visibility? And how do you put in data loss management practices that will basically give you that visibility and help you remediate anything that may be exposed and get you a lot closer down to that zero trust model? So with that, what I'd love to do is just show you how it works. And walk you through the platform and basically give you a bit of a sample of what that looks like today. So what you're looking at, this is actually our latest and greatest that we've added to our Better Cloud Secure module. This is our data exposure tab. And really what we've learned working with the field is, where do I start? Like, where do I even start to get those insights about what data may have been accidentally exposed? And here's where we show you what percentage of your, how many files we're seeing fall into public and external sharing within Google as just one of our examples. But basically, where are those files starting to fall, right? And how much risk is associated with that? I could peel back this layer. So I'm looking into my data shared externally. So all those gmail.coms and those ENYs and all those third-party domains, and trying to get an understanding of maybe some high-level trends that there may be there, right? I could see ownership trends, like who is the person that's collaborating the most in my work? Who is that most common collaborator? Who is that third party in my organization that is working with the most amount of our information? And also, is it following a trend of department? Is really sales and marketing really the ones that are externally collaborating the most? Obviously, good to kind of sanity check and see if those are actually falling to be true. I could even start to further peel back this onion and really start to understand explicitly which files are actually being shared out with some of these third parties. So you'll notice I see a person named Marissa at Gmail that these files are being shared out with. And you'll notice I'm starting to question, who is Marissa? I mean, Marissa's my boss, but if I was the IT administrator, I'd be like, who is this person? Why are they getting access to these documents? And as I'll look at this, I'll be looking at names and be like, okay, I guess she likes to share passwords, but also, why is the product roadmap going to her personal email address? And now at this point, I think I have a starting point. I'd love to really understand my entire environment. I really want to get down, and after I understand some of these high-level trends, obviously, I may want to have a conversation with Marissa, but really, how common is this trend happening in my environment? What I have also is ability to do is doing content scans as well. What you're looking at is our content scanning module. And what this does is it'll look across Google My Drive, Dropbox, Slack files, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Box files. It will look at all files for specific PII or financial terms. We have a library of about 100 different built-in ones. This one is looking for things like social security numbers and person names. And basically, that's my leading indicator to tell me, hey, which of these files may contain some really sensitive PII. Within my report that comes out after I've content scanned my entire environment, I'm seeing I hit some violations, what those file names are, which provider it came out of, and how was it exposed? Is it public via link? Was it externally shared? And if I want to get further details, I'm able to see that on who it's shared out with. I could go into this violations. I could see, for example, oh man, I matched on a social security number and hit a couple of persons' names. I could even further investigate that file should I choose to. But really what I'm more focused on doing is trying to stop the leak. I really don't want this going out to the public. So what I may do is select these few files, and right from my report of my exposure, I may want to do is basically just patch these up. So go into my actions engine here where I have access to all these different API calls that I can do. But since I'm focused on these Google specific files, I'm going to focus on something that turns the file sharing off. So I'm going to do a set file sharing settings action. And from here, for these particular files, I will basically, for this Google environment, set it so that they're not shared with anyone with the link anymore, but they're only being shared out with the specific people who they're intended to be shared out with. So go and take that action. BetterCloud will then go out to that file and remove those public links that may exist on those particular files. So this is one way that we know that people are using BetterCloud to scan the entire environment, find these exposures, and basically start to use our actions to pull back, either deleting files, removing public links, removing any specific collaborators, basically to remediate that threat and just ensure that, hey, my current environment is starting to look very clean. After I've sort of cleaned my environment, looked through it, understand kind of where the current threat landscape starts to look like, what I may start to do is start to put policies in place that will start to help me remediate and detect some of these events as they're occurring. So we have the form of alerts where I could turn on things like such as tell me when social security numbers are being shared out to the public. I can start to look at those and start to remediate those. And what this looks like is it uses what's called a BetterCloud workflow to orchestrate this. If you've ever used tools before in your life, like if this, then that, well, it's basically also a policy builder to help design and build what are going to be some of my policies that help reduce my risk and also reduce the amount of workload that has to go into detecting and resolving a lot of these incidents as they occur. So you'll notice it uses a simple when if then statement, basically to say, hey, whenever I see a social security number being shared out, and in this case specifically with my domain, right? Maybe my policy is I don't even want social security numbers going into Google Drive at all. I don't want to take that sort of risk. So I'd much rather, if I have a very high and strict security posture, I want to make sure that my end users are very aware that this is something that we need to roll out as a practice. Granted, this may be, your practice may be a little bit reduced, and obviously you may want to adjust some of the actions of this workflow, but just to kind of show you the full extent of what could happen in a maximal security posture environment, we could be doing things such as like creating the ticket in ServiceNow. So that way now I have an audit log and a record of this within my own ticketing system. I could put in IT-centric fields into my ticket to give my security analysts and anybody on my IT staff all the information they need to know about the file, such as the name, who was last modified by, and what's a link to that file should we need to go investigate it. From there, I'll use our automated actions to basically start to pull back the exposure of that file. So doing things like setting the file sharing settings, just like in my action earlier, except this time I'll do it dynamically. I'll reference that file and pull it back so it's only shared out with specific people. Maybe I wanted to go an extra layer deep. Let's also take some collaborators off that file and make it so that it's completely private. I could even set some of the more advanced permissions on a file and be able to turn off things like download, print, and copy. And I want to be able to involve the file owner as a part of this remediation and let them know, hey, we had an automated detection happen. We've already proactively pulled it back. Here's all the information about that file. Please reach out to us should you have any questions. Obviously, it goes against policy. And you may have different variations of this message depending on your posture. But again, really just showing one of the more extreme examples of what this could look like. I also have an internal channel within my Slack, again, that I'm populating this with messages. I have a couple people on my team that are exclusively Slack readers, and this is how they get queued into these events happening. I don't want to necessarily have them in BetterCloud all the time looking for this to happen. And then basically, I could even go the extra mile. I have a Lessonly that goes over security training. I could send them out that Lessonly, and now they're re-enrolled in security training. And then I have basically an approval message going out to them, letting them know, hey, did you review that assignment? Everything okay? What's up? From this point, they could tell me that they've completed their assignment. And then at that point, my last step is to just close the incident. We know that the person has, acknowledged the file exposure. We've remediated the file internally in an automatic fashion, and they've completed their security training, and now we've closed the incident out. And of course, it's very easy to mix match add properties. You'll notice I have a bunch of other actions that you could do across providers to really customize and fine tune and tailor what's the amount of action you want to take based off the risks that we're detecting. But with that, that is really where we would start to use the Better Cloud platform to help with your insider threats and risk. With that, really, here are just some of the key takeaways I hope you had from this presentation. We know the SaaS sprawl is happening. We know the asset sprawl is happening. We know it's locking up some discussions with mergers and acquisitions, and especially in the case of Twitter. So the sooner you are kind of ahead of this problem and the more visibility you have to it, the more you're reducing your risk, should and when and if that data breach would happen. We're obviously here to help you. We have a lot of resources about how to better establish zero trust practices. And I know a lot of you are doing this today, but let's teach you and learn from some of the experts about how they've done this with their asset environments when it comes to their collaboration suites, right? So we want to help and be that safeguard for you. If you don't want to ask any questions in chat and you want to kind of leave some of this behind and take some resources later, obviously I'm happy to stay on, answer your questions in some of the time we have left. But really, if you want some take-home resources, subscribe to the Monitor. It's a great newsletter. It goes over a lot of IT and security trends that a lot of our community environment has been facing. Of course, all of our Help Center documentation is public. So if you're evaluating Better Cloud and want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can visit support.bettercloud.com. Also, join us in on the discussion. If you go to community.bettercloud.com, we just gave it a cool new facelift. So please come and say hello to us. We're more than happy to talk with you. And of course, resources.bettercloud has basically everything you need to know, from everything I've mentioned today to white papers, to making demo requests. We would love to have a conversation with you about your security posture and what we could do to help. So with that, I really want to thank you for your time. Happy to stay on, answer any questions. And with that, really appreciate everybody being here today and looking forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.